In a desolate western frontier, widower Samuel Reed's quiet life on his struggling ranch is shattered when fate forces him to purchase a mysterious young woman with a haunting past. As the remote town of Thornwood whispers dark rumors about Eleanor's scars, a dangerous man arrives claiming ownership of her soul. Now they must confront not only Eleanor's violent past, but also the unexpected feelings blooming between them, before the demons of their yesterdays destroy any chance of tomorrow. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from. Subscribe to our channel, it's free, and you can always change your mind. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The preacher's voice carried across the dusty square as the young woman stood beside him, barefoot and trembling beneath a faded cotton bonnet. Her eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to meet the gaze of the man who had just purchased her for $20. $20 for 20 years of life. Samuel Reed, widowed 2 winters ago with nothing but a broken-down ranch and a grave beneath a cypress tree, had just bought himself a stranger. As the townspeople whispered behind cupped hands, and the sheriff pretended not to notice the girl's bruised wrists, Samuel could only watch the dust cloud where her parents' wagon had disappeared. She wouldn't look at him, not even when thunder cracked above the church roof, and she whispered something so soft he strained to hear it. Don't let them find me." The girl they called Eliza was said to be marked by misfortune. Not spoken aloud, of course, but in whispers that traveled through Thornwood like wildfire. The town itself was nothing more than weathered boards and peeling paint, the kind of place where secrets festered beneath Sunday smiles. She'd arrived with her family 2 summers ago, walking 3 steps behind her mother, eyes always downcast. The scar along her collarbone remained mostly hidden, but those who glimpsed it never forgot the jagged line that looked like a failed attempt to silence her permanently. Samuel's hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching, as they walked toward his wagon. "You'll have your own room," he said simply. A gust of wind caught her bonnet, revealing eyes that held such weariness that Samuel felt something crack inside his chest, the first real feeling he'd had since bearing his wife and infant son. What had Samuel just purchased? A servant? A wife? Or something darker that would haunt them both? Chapter 2. The wind changed direction the day Eliza moved into Samuel's house. Not just the air itself, which carried the scent of coming rain, but the rhythm of things. The silence wasn't so heavy anymore. Not gone, but different. Less like a shroud and more like a pause. Samuel Reed had lived alone for too long. His cabin sat beyond the wheat fields, a half-day's ride from town, where his wife and son lay buried beneath 2 rough-hewn crosses. He'd built every inch of it himself, from the stone fireplace to the cedar-shingled roof, and hadn't let another soul cross the threshold since the funeral. Until her. Eliza didn't speak much, but she cleaned the windows on the first morning, scrubbed the floors on the second, and by the third had somehow coaxed fragrant stew from ingredients Samuel had forgotten were in his pantry. He didn't ask her to, didn't stop her either. He noticed her limp when she walked to the water pump, favoring her left ankle slightly. He saw the scar when sunlight caught it just right, a pale crescent moon curving beneath her jaw, poorly stitched by untrained hands. He never asked about either. On the 5th evening, she sat on the porch, mending a tear in one of his shirts. Samuel brought her a cup of coffee, set it down beside her, and sat in the chair a few feet away. They didn't speak, but for the first time since she'd arrived, the silence felt almost comfortable. That night, Samuel woke to the sound of muffled crying. He lay awake listening, wondering what ghosts had followed her to his door and whether they were any worse than his own. Chapter 3. For 3 weeks, they orbited each other like cautious planets, never quite colliding. Samuel worked the fields from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, tending livestock, planting crops that might survive the harsh soil. Eliza transformed the house piece by piece, not into something new, but into something that remembered how to welcome life. The first time she looked him in the eye was over a broken plate. It had slipped from her hands, shattering against the floor. She froze, shoulders hunched, hands trembling as if waiting for punishment. Samuel simply said, "We have plenty more." Then he reached for the broom. She flinched, pressing herself against the wall as if he might strike her with it. Understanding dawned on him then. She wasn't afraid of the broken dish, but of him. He held the broom out to her instead, handle first, and waited. After a long moment, she took it, her eyes finally meeting his. They were amber in the lantern light, flecked with gold, and filled with a wary question. "I don't hurt people, Eliza," he said quietly. "Not ever." She nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of her chin, but it was a beginning. That night on the porch, the silence between them shifted again. She sat closer to his chair, her hands busy with mending, but her shoulders less tense. When an owl called from the barn roof, Samuel pointed to it, and Eliza smiled, just a flicker at the corner of her mouth, but the first he'd seen. "My name," she said suddenly, her voice soft but steady, "is actually Eleanor." Samuel looked at her, surprised not by the revelation, but that she'd chosen to share it. "Eleanor," he repeated, testing the sound. "It suits you better." She nodded again, this time with certainty. "My father changed it when we moved here. Said Eliza was more fitting for a girl in our situation." "And what situation was that?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. Eleanor's fingers stilled on her mending. "Running." The word hung between them like smoke. Samuel wanted to ask more, but recognized the fragility of this moment. Push too hard and she would retreat again. So he simply nodded and offered her more coffee. Later, as crickets serenaded the darkness and fireflies winked in the wheat field, Eleanor spoke again. "Why did you buy me?" Samuel considered his answer carefully. "I saw your father's sign posted at the mercantile. Domestic arrangement available. I saw the bruises on your wrist when you came to town the following day. I know a cage when I see one. So you opened the door?" Her voice held no accusation, only curiosity. Samuel looked out at the stars scattered across the midnight sky. "I know what it's like to be trapped by grief. I figured money might convince your father to release you from whatever was keeping you bound. He needed to pay a debt." Eleanor's voice hardened. "To a man named Victor Blackwood." The name hung in the air like a curse. Samuel had heard whispers about Blackwood, a businessman from the East with coal-black eyes and a reputation for collecting what he felt he was owed, one way or another. "He won't stop looking," she whispered. "He believes I belong to him now." Samuel's jaw tightened. "You belong to no one but yourself." Eleanor turned to him then, moonlight silvering her face. "My father doesn't see it that way, and neither does Blackwood." "Then they'll have to get through me first," Samuel said, the quiet certainty in his voice surprising them both. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression. Not quite trust, but perhaps its hesitant beginning. She reached out, her fingertips briefly touching the back of his weathered hand. "Thank you." That simple touch, featherlight and gone in an instant, changed everything between them. The next morning, the sheriff's boy came galloping up the dirt road, his face flushed with exertion. "Mr. Reed, there's a man in town asking about the girl. Tall fellow with a black coat and fancy boots. Sheriff told him to move along, but he's staying at the hotel. Says he has papers." Samuel felt Eleanor's presence behind him in the doorway, sensed her fear like a physical thing. "Tell the sheriff I'll be in tomorrow," Samuel said, pressing a coin into the boy's palm, "and that I'd appreciate if he'd keep an eye on our visitor." After the boy left, Eleanor stood rigid on the porch, her knuckles white where she gripped the doorframe. "He's found me." Samuel turned to her, seeing not the frightened girl from the auction block, but a woman determined to survive. "We have options," he said. "You have options." For the first time since her arrival, Eleanor straightened her shoulders and raised her chin. "I'm not running anymore." The statement hung between them like a challenge, or perhaps a prayer. Samuel nodded, respect blooming in his chest. "Then we stand our ground." He spent the afternoon teaching Eleanor how to shoot his Winchester rifle. Her hands trembled at first, but by sunset, she could hit the fence post consistently from 30 paces. As they walked back to the house, Samuel noticed she no longer limped as pronouncedly. Some wounds were beginning to heal. That night, Eleanor sat closer to him on the porch, their shoulders nearly touching. "Tell me about your wife," she said softly. Samuel stiffened, then slowly relaxed. Her name was Catherine. She loved wildflowers and thunderstorms, laughed like she was giving away something precious. She died bringing our son into the world. He followed her an hour later. Eleanor didn't offer empty condolences. Instead, she said, "I think they would be proud of you." Samuel looked at her, startled by the insight. "Why do you say that?" "Because despite losing everything, you still remember how to be kind." Her voice was soft but certain. That's rare in this world. Before Samuel could respond, a distant rumble of hoofbeats broke the silence. Eleanor tensed, reaching instinctively for the rifle propped against the wall. But it wasn't Blackwood. Just a lone rider passing on the main road, heading away from town. Still, the interruption reminded them both of the threat looming on the horizon. Eleanor stood, her decision evident in the set of her jaw. "Tomorrow we go to town. Together. I won't hide anymore." Samuel nodded, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. Together. Neither realized how that single word would come to define everything that followed. Enjoying our stories? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Now let's get back to our story. Chapter 4. Thornwood always looked smaller in the harsh light of morning, just a handful of weathered buildings strung along a dusty road, humming with secrets and slow-burning resentments. As Samuel guided the wagon toward the mercantile, curious eyes followed their progress from behind curtains and storefront windows. Eleanor sat beside him, spine straight as a fence post, her mother's bonnet abandoned in favor of a simple braid that caught copper highlights in the sun. She wore one of Catherine's old dresses, altered to fit her slighter frame. On her lap lay a cloth-wrapped package, Samuel's revolver loaded and ready. They'd agreed on a plan. Purchase supplies, speak with the sheriff, and be gone before noon. Simple, direct, avoiding confrontation if possible. But plans rarely survive first contact with the enemy. Victor Blackwood stood on the boardwalk outside the hotel, smoking a thin cigar. He was taller than Samuel had imagined, with shoulders like an oak beam and eyes that reminded Samuel of a rattlesnake he'd once killed. Flat, unblinking, patient. Beside him stood Eleanor's father, Martin Hayes, looking considerably smaller than Samuel remembered, his hat crushed between nervous hands. Samuel felt Eleanor stiffen beside him, but was impressed when she didn't shrink away. He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the mercantile, deliberately turning his back on Blackwood as he helped Eleanor down. "Remember," he murmured, "you're free to choose." She nodded, her fingers briefly squeezing his. They almost made it inside before Blackwood's voice cut through the morning air, smooth as oiled leather. "Miss Hayes, what a pleasant surprise." Eleanor turned slowly, her face a careful mask. "Mr. Blackwood." The man stepped forward, twirling his cigar between long fingers. "Your father and I have been quite concerned about your hasty departure." His gaze slid to Samuel, assessing. "I see you found alternative arrangements." Martin Hayes shuffled forward, his eyes never quite meeting his daughter's. "Eliza, you need to come home now. This has gone on long enough." Eleanor's voice when she spoke carried across the street with unexpected strength. "My name is Eleanor, and I am home." A few townspeople had stopped to watch the drama unfold, including Sheriff Miller, who emerged from his office with a hand resting casually on his holster. Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. You see, your father and I had an arrangement." He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "Quite legal, I assure you. In exchange for settling his considerable debts, you were promised to me." Samuel stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Eleanor. "A person isn't property to be traded, regardless of what paper you're holding. Perhaps in your simplistic moral universe, Mr. Reed, Samuel Reed, Mr. Reed, but this is a matter of business and law." Blackwood's eyes hardened. "I've invested a significant sum in Mr. Hayes' enterprises, with specific collateral promised." Sheriff Miller stepped closer, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Now, gentlemen, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I want witnesses when I say this." She looked directly at her father. "I forgive you for what you did to me, but I will never be yours to sell again." Martin Hayes flinched as if struck. "You don't understand the position I was in." "I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "You chose your debts over your daughter." She turned to Blackwood next, her eyes like amber flint. "And you thought you could buy a person. You can't. No paper, no amount of money, no threats can make me yours. I belong to myself." A dangerous stillness settled over Blackwood's features. Brave words from a girl who bears the marks of disobedience on her skin. "Shall I tell these good people how you earned that scar beneath your jaw?" Samuel tensed, his hand inching toward the revolver at his hip. Eleanor touched his arm gently, stopping him. "Go ahead," she said to Blackwood. "Tell them how a grown man holds a knife to a 16-year-old girl's throat for speaking out of turn. Tell them how you promised my father you'd tame me." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Sheriff Miller's expression darkened as he stepped closer to Blackwood. "That's enough," he said firmly. Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you take whatever claim you think you have to the circuit judge when he comes through next month. Until then, Miss Hayes, or Miss Eleanor, is free to stay wherever she chooses. Blackwood's smile was cold as January frost. Of course, Sheriff. I'm a patient man. His gaze locked with Eleanor's. And I always collect what's owed to me. He tipped his hat, turned on his heel, and strode back toward the hotel. Martin Hayes scurrying after him like a whipped dog. Only when they were out of sight did Eleanor release the breath she'd been holding. Samuel noticed her hands were shaking, but her eyes remained clear and determined. Sheriff Miller approached them, his weathered face grave. That man's dangerous, Samuel. You'd best watch your back. We intend to, Samuel replied, his hand finding Eleanor's elbow in silent support. The sheriff nodded. I'll keep an eye on things in town, but my jurisdiction ends at the county line. You're on your own out at your place. We always have been, Eleanor said quietly. As they gathered their supplies and prepared to leave town, Samuel noticed a shift in how the townspeople regarded Eleanor. The whispers continued, but they carried a different tone now. Less judgment, more speculation. Several of the women nodded to her as they passed, small gestures of recognition or perhaps respect. Mrs. Holloway, the preacher's wife, even pressed a small package into Eleanor's hands. Chamomile tea, she whispered, for nerves, and a bit of honey from our hives. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Thank you. The older woman squeezed her hand briefly. You're welcome at service any Sunday you wish, my dear. As they rode home, the tension gradually eased from Eleanor's shoulders. I never stood up to him before, she said softly. Not like that. Samuel glanced at her, noting the way the afternoon sun caught in her hair. You were magnificent. A smile touched her lips, small but real. It felt right, like finding my voice after years of silence. Samuel nodded, understanding perfectly. Some silences need breaking. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable quiet, both aware that this confrontation marked not an ending, but a beginning. Blackwood wouldn't give up easily, nor would Eleanor's father simply disappear from their lives. But for now, as the ranch came into view, framed by golden wheat fields and the distant purple smudge of mountains, it was enough to have claimed this moment of defiance, this declaration of personhood. Eleanor looked at the small house, the barn with its crooked weather vane, the kitchen garden she'd started from seed. Do you think we'll be safe here? Samuel considered the question seriously. I think safety is never guaranteed, but here at least, you won't face danger alone. She nodded, seeming to find comfort in his honesty. As they approached the house, Eleanor straightened her shoulders, as if preparing to step into a new version of herself. One who fought back, one who chose her own path. Neither of them saw the lone rider watching from the distant ridge, or the glint of sunlight on his brass spyglass as he observed their return. The battle, it seemed, had only just begun. Chapter 5. 3 days passed in uneasy peace after their confrontation in town. Samuel reinforced the locks on the doors and windows, kept the rifles loaded, and taught Eleanor to recognize the warning signs of approaching riders. Dust clouds in the distance, the nervous behavior of the horses, the sudden silence of birdsong. Eleanor threw herself into making the ranch more defensible. She cleared sight lines around the house, chopping back overgrown bushes with surprising strength. She organized supplies, ensuring water and food were accessible if they needed to retreat inside quickly. At night, she insisted on taking turns keeping watch, despite Samuel's protests. I've spent too long being protected in ways that were really just another form of cage, she told him firmly. I won't be a burden now. So they established a rhythm, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, sitting in the kitchen with the lamp turned low, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. It was during Eleanor's watch, just before dawn on the 4th day, that she noticed the silence. No crickets, no night birds, not even the gentle lowing of the cow in the barn. She woke Samuel with a hand pressed firmly against his mouth, her index finger raised to her lips. He was instantly alert, reaching for the rifle propped beside his bed. They moved silently through the darkened house, taking up positions at different windows. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, casting the world in shades of blue-gray. Nothing moved in the yard. Then Eleanor saw it, a flicker of movement near the barn, a shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows. She signaled to Samuel, who nodded grimly. Stay here, he mouthed, moving toward the back door. Eleanor shook her head firmly, pointing to herself, then to the front window. I'll cover you. After a moment's hesitation, Samuel nodded. She was right. They stood a better chance together than separated. The minutes stretched as they waited, watching. The shadow moved again, this time joined by a second figure. They were attempting to approach the house from different directions. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. She drew a deep breath, then deliberately knocked a tin cup from the windowsill, sending it clattering to the floor. The sound shattered the silence. The shadows froze. Then one darted toward the water trough for cover. "That's far enough," Samuel called out, his voice carrying in the still morning air. "This property is defended." A familiar laugh drifted back, Victor Blackwood's smooth, cultured tones. "Mr. Reed, how territorial of you. I've simply come to retrieve what's rightfully mine." "There's nothing here that belongs to you," Samuel replied evenly. "The law disagrees." Blackwood's voice hardened. "I have a signed contract with Mr. Hayes, witnessed and notarized. The girl is my property, purchased fair and legal." Eleanor moved to the door, standing just behind Samuel. "People can't be property, Mr. Blackwood," she called out. "No matter what paper you hold." "Ah, there she is." Blackwood sounded pleased. "Always did have a sharp tongue. We'll need to address that." "You're trespassing," Samuel said coldly. "Leave now, and there won't be trouble." The second shadow moved, revealing itself as Martin Hayes, Eleanor's father. He stepped into the dim light, hands raised placatingly. "Eliza, Eleanor, please, just come with us. Mr. Blackwood has been very understanding, considering the circumstances. He's willing to forgive this indiscretion." Eleanor felt a wave of pity for the broken man her father had become, but her voice remained firm. "There's nothing to forgive. I've made my choice." Her father's face crumpled. "You don't understand. If you don't come, he'll take our farm instead. Your mother, your sisters, they'll have nothing." The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "Mom and the girls, they're alive?" Last she'd heard, her mother had fallen ill, and her younger sisters sent to live with an aunt back east. Hayes nodded miserably. "They returned last month. That's why I needed to settle things with Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood stepped into view now, confident in this new leverage. "Family is so important, isn't it? Sacrifices must be made." Eleanor felt Samuel tense beside her, ready to act. She placed a hand on his arm, steadying him as she sorted through her thoughts. "If I go with you," she said slowly, "you'll leave my family alone? You'll clear my father's debts?" "Eleanor, no," Samuel whispered fiercely. She squeezed his arm. "Trust me." "You have my word as a gentleman," Blackwood said smoothly. "Come peacefully now, and all debts are forgiven." Eleanor stepped forward onto the porch. The early light caught the determination in her eyes. "I want it in writing, here and now, and I want Sheriff Miller to witness it." Blackwood's smile faltered. "The sheriff isn't necessary for a private business matter." "He is, if you want me to leave willingly." Eleanor's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. "You value your reputation, Mr. Blackwood. How would it look if people heard you dragged a woman from her home at gunpoint, or that you're forcing her to pay debts she never incurred?" A tense silence followed as Blackwood calculated his options. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Very well. We'll draw up the papers in town, but you come with us now." Eleanor shook her head. "Papers first with the sheriff present, then I'll consider your offer." "You're in no position to negotiate," Hayes burst out, panic edging his voice. "I disagree," Samuel said quietly, stepping forward to stand beside Eleanor. In the growing light, the Winchester in his hands gleamed dully. "She's exactly where she needs to be to negotiate." Blackwood's expression darkened. "This isn't over, Mr. Reed. The law is on my side." "Perhaps," Samuel allowed, "but right now you're trespassing on my land, attempting to remove someone against their will. I wonder how the law would view that." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Blackwood adjusted his coat with deliberate calm. "Very well. We'll continue this discussion in town, with the proper authorities present. 9 o'clock. He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Reed, I admire your chivalry, but don't mistake temporary advantage for victory." They watched as the two men retreated, mounting horses hidden in the tree line. When they were out of sight, Eleanor's composure finally cracked. She sagged against the doorframe, trembling. "My sisters," she whispered. "I didn't know." Samuel gently guided her inside, his face grave. "You're not considering going with him?" It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "No, but I need to make sure my family's safe." Samuel nodded slowly. Then we'll go to town, together, but not to surrender, to find another way. Eleanor looked up at him, seeing the determination in his weathered face, the concern in his eyes. Something warm unfurled in her chest, like a flower turning toward the sun. Together, she agreed softly. They spent the morning preparing. Samuel loaded the wagon with supplies, positioned rifles within easy reach, and hitched his most reliable horses to the traces. Eleanor changed into her sturdiest dress, braided her hair tightly, and tucked a small knife into the hidden pocket she'd sewn into her skirts. As they set out for town, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Eleanor watched the familiar landscape roll past, the creek where she'd first caught sight of a wild deer, the oak tree where she'd read aloud from Samuel's battered copy of The Odyssey, the fields they'd planted together with wheat and corn. In just a few months, this place had become more home to her than anywhere she'd lived in years. The thought of leaving it, of leaving Samuel, felt like contemplating the removal of her own heart. "Whatever happens in town," she said suddenly, "I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything." Samuel glanced at her, his eyes softening. "Nothing to be grateful for. I did what any decent person would do." Eleanor shook her head. "No, you did what most people wouldn't dare. You saw me when I was invisible. You heard me when I couldn't speak. You gave me choices when others only gave orders." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "And when we get through this, I'd like to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I've found where I belong." Samuel's hands tightened on the reins, a flush creeping up his neck. "I'd like that," he said simply. The words hung between them, fragile and precious as sunlight on dew. Then Thornwood appeared on the horizon, and Eleanor straightened her shoulders, preparing once more for battle. The town was unusually busy for a weekday morning. Word of the confrontation had clearly spread, drawing the curious and the concerned alike. As Samuel guided the wagon down the main street, Eleanor noted faces pressed to windows, conversations halting mid-sentence, eyes following their progress. Sheriff Miller waited outside his office, thumbs hooked in his belt. Beside him stood Judge Harrison, who wasn't due in town for another 2 weeks. Eleanor's stomach tightened at the sight of the stern-faced man whose circuit included 3 counties. His unexpected presence suggested Blackwood had pulled significant strings. "Remember," Samuel murmured as he helped her down from the wagon, "you have choices, always." Eleanor nodded, drawing strength from his steadfast presence as they approached the sheriff's office. Inside, Blackwood and Hayes already waited, along with the town's notary, Mr. Finch, and surprisingly, Reverend Holloway from the church. The small room felt crowded with tension. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Let's get to business. I understand there's a dispute regarding a contractual obligation." Blackwood stepped forward smoothly, producing a document from his inside pocket. "Indeed, Your Honor. I hold here a legal contract signed by Mr. Hayes, offering his daughter's hand in marriage in exchange for the settlement of his debts. The young lady has since been persuaded to reject this arrangement, causing significant financial and personal embarrassment." The judge examined the paper, his expression unreadable. "And you, Miss Hayes, what say you to these claims?" Eleanor stood tall, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "I say that I never consented to this arrangement. I was not present when this document was signed, nor was I consulted. Furthermore, I believe no court in this country would uphold a contract that treats a human being as transferable property." Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Brave words, young lady." He turned to Samuel. "And you, Mr. Reed, what is your interest in this matter?" "I offered Miss Eleanor sanctuary when I learned of her situation," Samuel said simply. "I believe every person has the right to choose their own path." "How noble," Blackwood interjected sarcastically. "And how convenient that her path led straight to your isolated ranch." Samuel's jaw tightened, but Eleanor spoke before he could respond. "Mr. Reed has been a perfect gentleman. More importantly, he has been human when others treated me as a commodity." The judge studied her face, then Samuel's, before returning his attention to the document. "This contract," he said slowly, "while troubling in its implications, does bear legal signatures and a notary's seal." Eleanor's heart sank. "However," the judge continued, "it also hinges on an arrangement, namely marriage, that requires mutual consent under the laws of this territory." He looked directly at Eleanor. "Do you consent to marry Mr. Blackwood?" "I do not," she said firmly. "Not now, not ever." The judge nodded. Then regardless of Mr. Hayes's promises, the contract cannot be executed as written. Blackwood's face darkened. Your Honor, surely you understand the financial implications. I've invested considerable sums, which is a matter between you and Mr. Hayes, the judge interrupted. The young lady cannot be compelled to marry against her will. Relief coursed through Eleanor, but it was short-lived. That said, the judge continued, there is the matter of Mr. Hayes's debts, which remain legally binding. If those debts were incurred on behalf of his family, including his daughter, there may be grounds for financial obligation. No! The outburst came from an unexpected source, Reverend Holloway. Forgive me, Your Honor, but I must speak. The thin, gray-haired man stepped forward, Bible clutched in his weathered hands. I have remained silent too long on matters that should concern every God-fearing person in this community. All eyes turned to the Reverend, whose usual gentle demeanor had been replaced by righteous indignation. Mr. Blackwood arrived in our town 3 years ago, presenting himself as a businessman and benefactor. Since then, I have witnessed him extend loans with terms that ensure failure, pressure vulnerable families, and use financial leverage to obtain personal advantages. The Reverend turned to Hayes. Martin, tell the truth. Did you borrow money to save your wife's life during her illness? Hayes nodded miserably. The doctor in Carson City required payment up front for the surgery. And the interest Mr. Blackwood charged? Hayes swallowed hard. 40%, compounded monthly. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered outside the open door. Judge Harrison's bushy eyebrows rose. That rate exceeds the legal limit for this territory by a considerable margin, Mr. Blackwood. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily. Business arrangements between private parties are still subject to territorial law, the judge finished firmly. He turned to the Reverend. Do you have evidence of other such arrangements? Reverend Holloway nodded. I've been collecting testimonies. The Wilsons, the Clarks, the Peterson widow, all face similar terms. All lost property or, he glanced at Eleanor, were pressured to offer other forms of payment. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. I can confirm unusual property transfers over the past 2 years. Didn't think to connect them until now. The tide was turning. Eleanor felt Samuel's steady presence beside her, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. Judge Harrison's stern gaze settled on Blackwood. It appears we have a more serious matter to investigate than a disputed marriage contract. Mr. Blackwood, you will surrender all loan documents to this court for immediate review. Sheriff, secure his rooms at the hotel. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. This is outrageous. I have connections in the territorial capital, which you are welcome to contact from my jail while we verify these allegations. Sheriff Miller interrupted, his hand moving to his holster. Eleanor's father sank into a chair, his face ashen. What have I done? He whispered. She approached him slowly, kneeling beside his chair. You tried to save Mom, she said softly, but you can't save someone by sacrificing another. Hayes looked at his daughter, really seeing her perhaps for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Eleanor. So sorry. She nodded, accepting his apology without offering forgiveness. That would take time. What about Mom and the girls? Are they really back? Yes, he admitted. At your aunt's place in Carson City. Your mother's been asking for you. Eleanor felt a complex wave of emotions. Relief, anger, hope, caution. I'll write to her, she said finally, when I'm ready. As Sheriff Miller escorted a furious Blackwood from the office, Judge Harrison turned to Eleanor and Samuel. This matter is far from concluded, but the immediate threat is contained. Mr. Hayes's debts will need to be recalculated at legal rates and restitution considered for those who suffered under usurious terms. Eleanor nodded, hardly daring to believe this sudden turn of events. Outside, the townsfolk had gathered in larger numbers, curious about the commotion. As Eleanor and Samuel emerged, a few women approached hesitantly, led by Mrs. Holloway. We should have questioned things sooner, the preacher's wife said quietly. When he started offering loans, we should have asked why a wealthy man would bother with our small town. Eleanor offered a small smile. Sometimes it's hard to see what's right in front of you when you're just trying to survive. As they prepared to leave town, Eleanor felt a strange lightness. Not freedom exactly, not yet, but its possibility. The road ahead still held uncertainty. Blackwood's influence might extend beyond Thornwood. Her relationship with her family remained complicated, and the whispers would likely continue. But for the first time since she'd arrived in this dusty corner of the territory, Eleanor felt the ground solid beneath her feet and her future her own to determine. Samuel helped her into the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Ready to go home?" he asked quietly. The word home settled in her chest like a warm coal. "Yeah," she said. "Let's go home." As they drove away, neither noticed the dark-suited man observing from the hotel balcony, his expression cold as he watched Blackwood being led to the jail. The man made a note in a small leather book before retreating inside. Some battles were just beginning. Chapter 6. Spring came to the ranch in a riot of wildflowers and birdsong. The fields Samuel had sown, with Eleanor's help, sprouted emerald shoots that danced in the breeze, promising bounty after years of meager harvests. In the kitchen garden, Eleanor's careful tending had coaxed life from seeds she'd saved and traded for. Tomatoes, beans, herbs that perfumed the air when she brushed against them. 3 months had passed since Victor Blackwood had been escorted from Thornwood in shackles, charged with usury and fraud after Judge Harrison's investigation uncovered a web of illegal financial schemes. His business partner, the dark-suited man from the hotel, had vanished overnight, taking what evidence he could with him. The territorial prosecutor warned that Blackwood's connections might yet secure his release, but for now the immediate threat had passed. Eleanor had exchanged cautious letters with her mother, learning that her sisters, now 12 and 14, were attending school in Carson City. Her mother's health remained fragile, but she was recovering under her sister's care. Eleanor's father had sold their small farm to repay legitimate debts and taken work as a stable hand at the stage station. Their relationship remained strained, but the sharp edges of betrayal had begun to soften. Life at the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. Samuel and Eleanor worked side by side from dawn until dusk, repairing what had broken during his years of grief, building what had never existed before. They taught each other without realizing. He showed her how to mend harnesses and predict weather from cloud patterns. She taught him to identify healing plants and bake bread that didn't resemble stone. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, sometimes reading aloud from his small collection of books, sometimes simply watching the sunset paint the prairie in amber and gold. The silence between them had transformed completely, no longer wary or wounded, but comfortable as a well-worn quilt. They still hadn't spoken about what might lie beyond friendship, though the question hovered in lingering glances and fingers that brushed accidentally while passing tools or dishes. Eleanor had healed enough to recognize the warmth that bloomed in her chest when Samuel smiled, the way her skin tingled when he stood close. But old fears died hard, and she guarded her heart carefully, uncertain if he felt the same. Samuel, for his part, battled his own ghosts. Sometimes he still woke calling Catherine's name, guilt washing over him at the thought of finding happiness after her loss. Yet increasingly, it was Eleanor's face he saw in dreams. Eleanor laughing as she chased a chicken back to its coop. Eleanor focused intently as she aimed his rifle at a fence post. Eleanor silhouetted against the sunset, hair tumbling free of its braid. On a warm evening in late May, they sat side by side on the porch steps, closer than usual, shoulders almost touching. Eleanor was mending one of Samuel's shirts, while he whittled a small wooden horse for the Peterson boy, who'd broken his leg falling from the church roof. "Sheriff Miller mentioned the circuit court has set a trial date for Blackwood," Samuel said, breaking the comfortable silence. "August, in the territorial capital." Eleanor's fingers stilled momentarily. "Will we need to testify?" "The prosecutor thinks so. Your testimony especially would help establish the pattern of exploitation." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll do it. I won't let fear silence me anymore." Samuel smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "You're the bravest person I know, Eleanor Hayes." A blush warmed her cheeks as she resumed her stitching. "Not brave, just tired of running. Facing what terrifies you instead of fleeing it, that's the definition of courage." She looked up at him then, finding his gaze already on her, warm and steady as a hearth fire. "Is that what you did? After Catherine?" Samuel's hands stilled on the carving. "Not at first. I ran in my own way. Buried myself in work, spoke to almost no one. Let the grief wall me in." He took a deep breath. "It wasn't until you arrived that I realized what I was doing." "Me?" Eleanor's voice was soft with surprise. "Seeing you fight your way back to yourself, day by day, it reminded me there's more to living than just surviving." He set the carving aside, his eyes never leaving hers. You woke something in me that I thought had died with her." The confession hung in the evening air, fragile and monumental. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as Samuel slowly, carefully reached out to touch her cheek. "I don't want to replace what you lost," she whispered. "You couldn't," he said honestly. "Catherine will always be part of me, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different, but equally real." Eleanor leaned slightly into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, she saw her own longing reflected in his gaze. "I never thought I'd trust anyone again," she admitted. "After everything that happened, I was certain that part of me was broken beyond repair." Samuel's thumb traced gently along her jaw, careful to avoid the scar. "Not broken, just waiting to heal." She set aside her mending then, turning to face him fully. "And have I healed?" "That's for you to say," he replied. "But from where I stand, you've done more than heal. You've flourished." The word settled over her like a benediction. Flourished. Yes, that felt right. Like a plant long kept in darkness, finally given light and water and room to grow. Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering courage for one more act of faith. She leaned forward and gently, hesitantly, pressed her lips to his. Samuel remained perfectly still for a heartbeat, then responded with such tenderness that tears pricked behind Eleanor's eyelids. His hand cradled her face as if she were made of spun glass, his kiss a question rather than a demand. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Eleanor rested her forehead against his. "I choose this," she whispered. "I choose you." Samuel smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright in the fading light. "And I choose you, Eleanor, not out of pity or obligation, but because you've become essential to me." They sat together as twilight deepened into night, talking softly of possibilities that had once seemed impossible, a future neither had dared imagine amid their separate griefs. No declarations of forever, no hasty promises, just the quiet acknowledgement that something precious was growing between them, something worth nurturing. 2 weeks later, Eleanor's sisters arrived for a visit, shepherded by a neighbor traveling to his brother's homestead nearby. Samuel watched from the barn as Eleanor embraced the girls, all three crying and laughing simultaneously. The younger one, Margaret, looked so much like Eleanor that Samuel's breath caught. The same amber eyes, the same determined chin. The older girl, Rebecca, hung back slightly, studying Samuel with cautious appraisal when Eleanor introduced them. "Are you going to be our brother now?" she asked bluntly. Samuel glanced at Eleanor, whose cheeks had flushed crimson. "That would be for your sister to decide," he said carefully. Rebecca nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, the last man wasn't given a choice." Eleanor had prepared for days, cleaning the small guest room, baking pies, fretting over whether the girls would feel comfortable. Now she watched as her sisters explored the ranch with increasing delight, helping gather eggs, learning to milk the cow, racing each other to the creek and back. On their third evening, after the girls had fallen asleep, exhausted from helping Samuel repair the chicken coop, Eleanor found him on the porch, smoking his pipe and gazing at the stars. "Thank you," she said softly, settling beside him, "for making them feel welcome." Samuel smiled. "They're easy to welcome. They remind me of you. Stubborn, curious, stronger than they know." Eleanor laughed quietly. "Rebecca grilled me thoroughly when you were out checking the fences. Wanted to know if you were kind all the time or just when company was visiting." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that you're the most consistently decent man I've ever known." Samuel's expression softened as he took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "They could stay, you know, if you wanted. There's room enough." Eleanor looked at him, startled. "But they have school in Carson City, and my mother, your mother could come too, when she's well enough to travel. This house was built for a family." He hesitated. "I know it's too soon to speak of marriage, but I want you to know that if you're ready, I'm offering more than just myself. I'm offering a home for all of you." Eleanor stared at him, wondering how this quiet, steadfast man had come into her life just when she'd lost all faith in humanity. "You'd do that? Take on not just me, but my whole broken family?" Samuel set his pipe aside, turning to face her fully. "Eleanor, listen to me. Your family isn't broken. Wounded, yes. Healing, definitely. But not broken." He squeezed her hand gently. "And yes, I would welcome them. Not as a burden, but as a blessing. This land has been too empty for too long." Eleanor felt tears well in her eyes, but for once, They weren't born of pain. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," he assured her. "Just think about it. Talk to your sisters. Write to your mother. There's no rush." But Eleanor knew her answer already, had known it perhaps since that first morning when she'd opened the dusty curtains in Samuel's house and let sunlight flood rooms that had been dark for years. "Yes," she said simply. Samuel blinked. "Yes?" Eleanor nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes to all of it. To bringing my family here. To building something new together. To marriage when we're both ready." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes. "Yes to choosing joy instead of fear." Samuel gathered her close then, his arms encircling her with the same gentle strength that had steadied her through months of healing. "I never thought I'd find this again," he murmured against her hair. "A reason to look forward to tomorrow." Eleanor closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, pine and leather and earth. "Neither did I." That night, long after Eleanor had gone inside, Samuel remained on the porch, watching shooting stars streak across the vast prairie sky. He thought of Catherine and their son, the family he'd lost and mourned. He would always carry them with him, their memory a sacred trust. But now, improbably, wonderfully, there was room in his heart for more. For Eleanor with her quiet courage, for her sisters with their bright curiosity, even for her wounded mother and repentant father. Life, Samuel realized, was determined to bloom even in the most barren places. All it needed was time, care, and the courage to start again. When the first rosy fingers of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Samuel finally stood, muscles stiff from his night vigil. In a few hours, the house would awaken. Eleanor in the kitchen, starting breakfast, her sisters tumbling out of bed full of plans and questions. The day's work waited. Fences to mend, livestock to tend, seeds to nurture. But for this moment, suspended between night and day, Samuel allowed himself to fully embrace the truth that had been growing in him for months. His heart, once shattered by loss, had not only healed but expanded. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Blackwood's trial, integrating Eleanor's family, the harsh realities of frontier life, they would face them together. Samuel turned toward the house, toward the future, and stepped forward. The porch boards creaked beneath his weight, a familiar sound that now seemed to whisper not of loneliness, but of homecoming. Inside, Eleanor stirred in her sleep, dreaming not of the scars of her past, but of wildflowers blooming across the prairie, stretching toward the sun, free, resilient, and gloriously alive. Wow, what a story! And there is more coming. Don't forget to subscribe to not miss a new stories.